Thank you and welcome everyone to our Research Connect series. My name is Leonard Hodder, a CDTRP patient partner, and I'll be facilitating today's webinar. So I'm a non-directed double donor, liver in 2019 and a kidney in 2021, and I volunteer at Toronto General Hospital helping the physiotherapy team working with lung transplant patients, and I also do volunteer with the Transplant Ambassador Program. So first, I'd like to acknowledge that the CDTRP is hosted by the University of Alberta, which is located on Treaty 6 territory, a traditional gathering place for diverse Indigenous peoples, including the Cree, Blackfoot, Métis, Nakota Sioux, Iroquois, Dene, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Anishinaabe, Inuit, and many others whose histories, languages, and cultures continue to influence our vibrant community. I'm coming to you today from Brampton, Ontario, which is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe. And I encourage you to write your land acknowledgement in the chat box. We'd also like to acknowledge Astellas and CIHR, whose generous support enabled us to host these sessions. So before we dive into the main content, I'll pass it to Erica for some general CDTRP updates.
Thank you, Leonard. Today I have two announcements for you all, and the first is a save the date for our PFD forum. This year's Patient, Family, and Donor Research Forum will be held virtually on June 13th and 14th. Registration is free and can be done through the link in the chat box. The second is an announcement for our scientific meeting. This year's annual scientific meeting will be held in a hybrid format with the in-person component in Calgary, Alberta on December 3rd and 4th. We are currently accepting poster and oral abstracts from all community members. So if you're interested, I will also provide a link for that in the chat. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Erica. Before I introduce the speakers, I have a few housekeeping notes. So today's session is recorded and posted on the CDTRP website and YouTube channel. During the presentation, please keep your mics turned off. And if you have any questions or comments, you can raise your hand with the raise hand button, or you can type it into the comment section. So I'm pleased to introduce our presenters, Dr. Puneeta Tandon and Ms. Emily Johnson. Dr. Tandon is a professor of medicine at the University of Alberta, director of Cirrhosis Care Clinic, transplant hepatologist, and lead of the Cirrhosis Care Alberta Quality Improvement Program. Her research uses digital technology as a knowledge translation tool to promote physical and mental health. Her career goal is to provide holistic, interdisciplinary, evidence-based, patient-centered care through education, empowerment, engagement, and teamwork. Ms. Johnson is a PhD student at the University of Alberta, where she completed her Master of Science degree in medicine with a passion for patient-oriented research and a commitment to improving health outcomes. Emily's doctoral project focuses on Empower, a 12-week online mind-body wellness program designed for adults with chronic health conditions. So we're all very excited. I'll hand it over to you now, Emily.
Thank you so much, Leonard, and thank you, Erica, for having us today. So unfortunately, Dr. Tandon had a bit of a mix-up with a flight and a surgery, so I'm here in lieu, and she did record her part of the presentation, so I will share my screen, and it'll be her part of the presentation, and then we'll switch over, and I will close out the remaining part of the presentation. But thank you, everyone, so much for being here. All right, and then just let me know if it's not sounding okay, but it should all work.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for the invitation to present today. Apologies that I couldn't be there live to join you, but I had a flight change that I couldn't change. So Emily Johnson will be co-presenting with me, and she will be live to answer questions, and I'd be happy to take questions by email as well. My disclosures, I have all of my research funding paid to my institution. And I'm going to really spend some time giving the background of the Empower randomized control trial, which we're here to speak about and which Emily can then spend more time on. And so in my section, I'm going to introduce these concepts of well-being, anxiety, depression, acute and chronic stress, and some of the science-based interventions that we've used in our Empower program to really develop a whole person approach to care across the transplant spectrum. And then Emily will jump in and talk about the Empower randomized control trial. Our enrollment is ending very soon, May 31st. There's still a little bit of time to get involved if you would like. Now let's start with my take-home messages. There are two big take-home messages. Number one is that stress results in an acute physiologic response, from which in the acute phase we tend to recover in a varying kind of time interval. Repeated episodes of stress over time cause wear and tear on the body and on the brain. And we can't ignore these. And there are, as I'll show you, science-based strategies to not only change our reaction to acute stress so it doesn't cause as much of a physiologic response, but also to reduce the wear and tear of chronic stress that's built up on our bodies and our minds. So we're all after well-being, and well-being is complex. It's got lots of things feeding it, including our physical health, psychological, social, occupational, financial, so many elements of well-being. And having a chronic condition, so whether that's being pre-transplant or post-transplant, that's a big deal. It has lots of impacts on well-being. And in addition to that, there's other things as well, isn't there? There's environmental stressors, there's major life events which are unavoidable for all of us. There's other things in childhood that may have happened. We're all different individually, coming in with our own genes, our development, our experience. And as a result of that, stresses that we go through result in different kind of responses, both externally, so our behavioral responses, but also internally, or our physiologic responses, how our body inside responds. And all of that leads to this balance between what's called allostasis and adaptation, lead to a buildup called allostatic load. And that's what this author, Dr. McEwen, has called wear and tear on the body and brain. Okay. Now, allostatic load, or that wear and tear on the body and brain, has an impact on health. And this is a systematic review, and there's several. But we know that this load, this wear and tear, can result in increases in blood pressure. It can result in increases in heart disease. It can contribute to increased weight. It can lead to depression and anxiety symptoms. It can actually lead to earlier cognitive decline, so memory issues, increased risk of infections, increased risks of cancer, and unhealthier choices, making it harder to kind of make healthy choices. So things like drinking, excessively smoking, and of course, unhealthy food habits. There's also building data that stress itself, so psychological stress, actually results in changes in the gut. Okay, so this so-called brain-gut axis that then has an effect on the immune system, other organs, and then in turn the brain, causing increased rates of stress, as well as heightening the risk for psychiatric disorders. Now, why the heck do we have stress if it's so bad for us? And there is a point, and this is a video that I'll show you. It's a very short clip of me actually jumping out of and at these moments in our life, or at other times when, when we need to be activated and on, the acute stress response is actually very helpful and very physiologic. It's called our fight or flight response, or our sympathetic nervous system gets activated. And it's important because that tells our body and our brain to get ready for action. It shuts down things that we don't need. So it shuts down saliva production. Our muscles tense up, our heart beats faster, our breathing gets faster and shallow. And we get a lot of things happening inside, like a release of stress hormones like cortisol, adrenaline, and inflammatory markers or inflammatory cytokines. So acute stress has a role. The problem is when we're skydiving multiple times a day, and that's happening commonly to individuals. And so we are skydiving when we're worried about a medical appointment, when we're in traffic and isn't going as we want to. We can make ourselves stressed and relive acute stress just by reliving stressful moments. And all of that contributes to what's called chronic stress, which is not healthy, unlike acute stress, which is necessary at times. And what does that do to our brains? It results in kind of a depleted battery, which contributes to fatigue, contributes to stress, anxiety, depression. So this concept of chronic stress has been defined in various ways. This is a definition of the American Psychological Association. It's where our emotional and our physiologic, so our inside body reactions, happen in situations where our demands exceed our ability to cope. And there are so many demands on, I'm sure, every single one of you. And some of them we can certainly do our best to try and reduce or manage or get under control, but demands will always be there. And so can we, in some way, also, in addition to looking at our demands, increase our ability to cope? And that is, as Emily will go through, that's the point of the Empower program that we'll show you. So just getting a little bit more into the physiology here, just to show you that stress, this particular paper goes through how psychological stressors then result in activation of several pathways in the body, including what's called the hypothalamic pituitary axis. That's what releases stress hormones, glucocorticoids in the system, and also activates the sympathetic nervous system, that fight or flight, jump out of a plane response, which activates noradrenaline and adrenaline. And then it has impacts also on modulating or changing our immune system. It also has impacts on the brain itself. So these are the three key brain areas that are involved in the stress response. And this is simplified, obviously, but just to go through this in larger detail. So there's an area called the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for memory, complex decision-making, impulse control. So whether you're just very emotionally reactive or whether you're able to kind of think about something and then react in a way that is perhaps more in line with your values. And the prefrontal cortex is like this chief commander that shuts down the stress response. So a very important thing to have functioning. The hippocampus is here. It is responsible for many things, but the key ones, memory and mood. It also helps to shut down the stress response. And then there's the amygdala, which is a little guy here that is like the sentinel, the fear sensor. Okay, so it really looks out for trouble and turns on the stress response, and that's what's responsible for fear, anxiety, anger. Now, what happens, and there's been a lot of research done into this in the brain when we do get stressed. Let's look at that, and this is some work from Stanford. So if you look at this figure, this is looking at prefrontal regulation during alert non-stress conditions. So as I mentioned, there's the amygdala, there's the prefrontal cortex, you've got guidance of attention and thought, you're inhibiting inappropriate actions, you're regulating emotion, all of that's happening. What happens during stressful conditions is, as this states here, even quite mild, acute, uncontrollable stress shuts off that chief commander fairly quickly, okay? Causes a rapid and dramatic loss of prefrontal cognitive abilities. And so the amygdala takes over and you go into survival mode. More prolonged stress exposure can actually cause changes in the shape of the brain as well, reducing the size of the, prefrontal cortex and increasing the size of the amygdala. Now, what can we do about all of this? Well, the goal is to try and, as I mentioned, shift the balance between our demands and our ability to cope. And so there's several things we can do across the spectrum of pre-transplant to post-transplant. We can optimize disease control. we can manage symptoms, and as physicians and your clinical team working together with individuals to help to manage symptoms is key. If you're feeling better, you are less stressed and you have less impact, less allostatic load. Directly addressing those stressors that you can control, so kind of identifying them and reducing them. Social support is huge, building a community, learning more about your condition. And then there's other things that are what we call non-drug related things that are very important as well. Things like exercise, nutrition, which I won't touch on too much today, but we will spend some time on components of the Empower program, such as psychological interventions and what we call mind-body interventions, okay? But there's many, many things in summary that we can do to try and empower ourselves. And because of the gaps that were there in the literature, this led us, our team, to really focus on research in this space. How can we help individuals to more systematically bring these empowering things into their life? And we started actually doing research in inflammatory bowel disease. And this is one of my first grad students who helped in this area. This is Michaela Watt, who's now gone on to medical school. But Michaela helped with running a randomized control trial in inflammatory bowel disease, where we got patient perspectives on a program that we developed. We then went on to do studies in primary biliary cholangitis, which is a liver disease. We developed a pilot study, and then we went on to do a randomized control trial, which Emily will show you the results of in primary biliary cholangitis. And then finally, we have gotten funded and are just at the tail end of recruitment on a larger trial called Empower, which is enrolling individuals pre and post-transplant, as well as other chronic conditions. And this is a team effort. Lots of people have contributed to this work. And how we like to describe it is kind of the best stress reduction practices from the East and from the West. So things like mindful movement, Tai Chi, yoga, just gentle movement, like chair exercises, breathwork practices, meditation, and things, the best from the West, the psychology kind of input. And the things in the program are based on what we call cognitive behavioral therapy, and a particular derivative of that called acceptance and commitment therapy, where you accept your reactions to be present as they are, and you take action based on your values. And I'll go into that a little bit more. But combining these two, I think, is what's really cool and really unique about this program. So the program, as we have it, is 12 weeks long. This is the Empower program. It's got all of these beautiful practices in it: mindful movement, breath work, meditation, sleep practices. It's also got a whole set, like I mentioned, of psychology-based practices. So you learn things from how do I figure out what my values are, to how do I pace or slow things down based on my energy battery? How do I practice self-compassion? How do I practice gratitude? How do I build a village around me? You also get a chance to learn about your condition. And so depending on whether or not individuals are in the post-transplant stream or in the pre-transplant stream, they get different educational tips every week. And there's a whole community of people doing the program together. And so that builds in some community support. Now, if we look at the movement, which is really key, it goes all the way from chair-based movements to Tai Chi, which is excellent for strength, flexibility, and balance. And then it goes into yoga that stays standing, as well as yoga that takes you to the floor, so a little bit more advanced. So movement for kind of every different participant level. And let me show you just a few studies about how this kind of came to be. Why did we put these practices in? Because they all actually have evidence to reduce that allostatic load, or that wear and tear that's accumulated on the body. So many studies, hundreds, showing the effects of yoga reducing perceived stress, even reducing fatigue, reducing inflammation in the body. Tai Chi, actually, as I mentioned to you, with that buildup of chronic stress, and over time, our brains actually shrink. Tai Chi can actually stabilize emotions but also slow that shrinkage of the brain down. Okay, and similar studies have been shown the same for yoga as well. And it can affect other things like heart rate variability, which is actually a marker of stress, and just how you feel, so perceived stress. I thought this review was really excellent. I am a big proponent of exercise in general, but this study was interesting in it that it looked at and compared exercise, the traditional kind of weights and aerobic exercise, as well as mind-body exercises, so Tai Chi and yoga, and found that both were actually very beneficial in improving cognitive function, so your brain function. But interestingly, mind-body exercise showed some additional benefits even over exercise. So not only can it help your mind, but it can also kind of help your body. And so big believer in both of these, both exercise and mind-body, more gentle movements. The program goes through breathwork practices, and these are sometimes, well, they're not that commonly known about actually, but they are so powerful, and you can pull them out of your back pocket. And you'll hear from our patients later on during Emily's presentation about how this was some of the most impactful stuff of the program. So you can do this anytime. And what you're doing with breathwork, remember I told you about the sympathetic nervous system, which is that fight or flight, jump out of a plane response. With breath work, you're actually activating the opposite, which is the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and relax part of your nervous system. And this gives you access to do that within seconds. Okay, so you learn during the program practices like belly breathing, practices like sighing, where you're breathing out longer than you're breathing in. And what those do is they activate the vagus nerve, which activates that relaxation response. So you have a whole breathwork practice that you go through in the program. And there have been multiple studies done on breathwork. We're just finishing up a systematic review of this ourselves, but this one, for example, looked at 12 randomized controlled trials, the most of them doing slow breathwork practices and overall showing significant improvements in stress, anxiety, and depression with these practices. Now, let's come back to meditation, because this can be scary for people who haven't done it before, but it's really just calming your mind. And we've got meditations in the program anywhere from as short as 3 minutes long to as long as 20 to 30 minutes long, depending upon what individuals resonate with. And where does it have an impact? Remember those brain areas that are said that are affected by stress? That's where it's got an impact. And there's some really cool data, which I won't have time to show you here, but where it actually does impact brain size and function. So we know that meditation, even for 8 weeks, can start to increase the volume of that prefrontal cortex, that chief commander, the front area. And it can decrease volume in the amygdala, which is that fear center. So you can actually see changes in the shape and function of your brain over relatively short periods of time with these practices that are reducing that allostatic load, clearing away some of that buildup of stress that's gotten there for over the last years of our lives. Also, meditation has been shown in studies to improve focus and memory, and I'll show you a couple of studies on the next slide, and improve emotional regulation. So you're not as reactive. You don't go off the handle as quickly as otherwise. I love this study. This was done out of one of the big US universities. This was 13 minutes of meditation a day for 8 weeks in people who were non-experienced meditators, so people who hadn't meditated before. And what they found in this study was it not only enhanced attention, memory, mood, and emotional regulation, but it started to see changes in the brain. Other studies have shown improvements in memory, other studies showing that brief meditation actually reorganizes the way that your networks in your brain connect. So that's called neuroplasticity, where you can have network nerve connections changing in a positive way in the brain. And that's how you kind of build new habits and things as well. Improving cognition, so that's how your thinking is, how quickly you can pull together more complex thoughts, and then improving sleep. And I'll just show you one more science slide, which is this really nice study from the University of Calgary, where they looked at the impact of meditation in individuals who were undergoing cancer treatment. And what they found was really interesting. They studied telomeres. And so telomeres are these little caps, these little gold caps, as pictured here on the chromosomes. And telomeres are a reflection of aging. So our little caps will go down in size as we age or have disease. And so we want to maintain our caps, the size of our caps for as long as we can. Now, what they found was that in these individuals who were randomized to the intervention in orange here, the size of their caps with meditation actually reduced less than those who didn't get randomized to the meditation arm. So really interesting. Again, just that idea that you can actually change your physiology, your insides, your inflammation, your stress markers, but also even potentially your telomeres and your brain size and function with these practices. Now, in addition to that, in the program, we do have psychology-based programming that I mentioned to you, and this is all based on acceptance and commitment therapy. And acceptance and commitment therapy was developed by this lovely psychologist, Dr. Stephen Hayes. And it's a really nice derivative of cognitive behavioral therapy. Instead of trying to force a change in your thoughts, though, what it does is it teaches skills to not get caught up in thoughts. And it recognizes that life is full of challenges that are going to come up, but it really allows for skills to develop that still, despite those challenges, allow for a meaningful, purposeful life. So not avoiding negative feelings, but really being what they call psychologically flexible to help to deal with what's coming and kind of deal with it in context of the values that you have and that you discover through the work that you do. And some of that is certainly in the Empower program. Okay, so I hope in my section that I've shown you that we all have a lot of demands, and certainly if you're living with a chronic condition, you have even more demands than others that are on you as far as things that increase stress, have the potential to increase anxiety, have the potential to increase depression, and all of those things can actually have significant health impacts as they build up in our mind and our body. But there are, similar to how we shower to kind of clean our bodies and reduce any dirt or buildup that happens there are evidence-based strategies that we can use to, let's say, clean our minds and reduce that buildup or that allostatic load that happens. And there's many things. We in the Empower program are focusing on a few of these strategies, but there's many, many things that you can do. And I look forward to Emily telling you a little bit about the Empower program, which has tried to pull together some strategies that can help in a fun way to help you to reduce some of that load and wear and tear on your brain and your body. And so with that, I will hand it over to Emily. Thank you so much for your attention.
All right, thank you, everyone. So I'm going to just switch over to my part of the presentation now. Just quickly share my screen. If you have any questions related to Dr. Tandon, you can pop them in the chat and I can forward them on to her, and I will do my best as well to answer them. Okay, so Dr. Tandon kind of took us through this roadmap of where our past research has gone and what's kind of led us now to this Empower study or Empower trial, which is point 6 here. But I'm just going to take a few steps back and just walk you through some of the findings that we had from the initial trials we did in people living with chronic liver disease. So we did a version of the Empower trial, which we called the Peace Power Pack, which was an online mind-body wellness program. And it was aimed towards people living with that primary biliary cholangitis or chronic liver disease. And we did a 2-arm trial. So we randomized people to either receive the program plus a weekly phone call check-in. And the program itself had all those practices that Dr. Tandon talked about. So it had mindful movement with yoga and Tai Chi and chair exercise. There was breath work, there's meditation, and then also acceptance and commitment therapy. So they received that program for 12 weeks, in addition to a weekly phone call. And this was done by myself or another member of our team. And we just called each person for a 5 to 10 minute discussion every week, talk through some of the content and get their feedback, and also do some goal setting for future weeks in the program. So they could have received that arm, or they could have received standard care. So they waited 12 weeks and then they got access to the program. And then when we looked at their survey results, we were excited to see some positive impacts for those that received the program compared to those that didn't. So we saw some very significant impacts on mental health symptoms, so looking at anxiety and depression. We also saw positive impacts on quality of life, but we didn't see very notable impacts on fatigue. However, when we looked at a subset of people, so we took the 20 of 43 people who did the program 3 or more times a week, so roughly about 90 minutes across the week. When we looked at just them, there was some more profound impacts on their mental health symptoms, and there was actually a significant impact on their fatigue symptoms as well. And we can't just rely on survey data, so we also did interviews with people who completed the program. And we were excited to hear about all the aspects of the program and what they took away from those aspects. So breath work for some people was a super valuable tool where they were able to use it throughout the day as they got stressed. Other people found that the meditation was really useful. So they found a stressful moment at work, and then going to their car and just starting a meditation really helped them cope and get through their day. And then others really emphasizing the fatigue piece, where pacing really allowed them to have some insight into managing their battery and managing their energy better. And so that led us into trying to understand what all of the literature is telling us. So we looked at inflammatory bowel disease, we looked at PBC with that latest study I just shared with you, but we wanted to know what other authors and other researchers have found when looking at online mind-body wellness programs. So we recently published this systematic review, which just looked at all the literature that published on online mind-body wellness programs for people living with chronic health conditions. And we call them chronic physical conditions just to delineate between chronic mental health conditions. And these could include a range of techniques. So it could be anything from Tai Chi, Qigong, yoga, breathing, meditation, as well as more of the psychology-based interventions like acceptance and commitment therapy or cognitive behavioral therapy. And this was a huge study. So we retrieved over, I think, 18,000 studies, but we narrowed it down to 56 that kind of met the criteria we were looking for, which resulted in over 7,600 participants or patients. And then we looked at what was the impact on their mental health symptoms. So we looked at anxiety and we looked at depression. And for those that had access to the online program, they had a greater reduction in their depression symptoms. We have an effect size up there of about 0.33, and then anxiety was about 0.26. So pretty significant reductions with just this online wellness programming. And when you actually look at other literature that looks at pharmacological therapies, these numbers are fairly similar to those therapies, which is pretty encouraging. So that leads me into the Empower program. So Dr. Tandon's mentioned it a few times in her presentation, but the Empower program is the latest iteration of our online mind-body wellness program. So what we've done is we took the feedback from those previous 2 studies in IBD and in PBC. We also took some of the insights gleaned from that systematic review, and we made some refinements to the program, also revamped it, added a lot more content, made the website itself much nicer and easier to navigate. And with this version of the program, we didn't just want to look at PBC and IBD, we wanted to expand it. So we've included a range of different chronic health conditions. So we've got 10 what we say are like disease-specific programs. And then we also have a general program. So for people who may not identify with any of those 10, then there is a program available for them. And we were also interested in scalability. So with this program, with our previous 2 studies, we gave a weekly check-in to participants, but we wanted to try and compare those who didn't have a check-in to those that did, and see if that personnel support level was really necessary or is necessary to have the most success with the program. And so our major research questions with this Empower program research study is to look if the program itself can improve anxiety and depression symptoms across all of these different chronic health conditions, and also understand what personnel support level is necessary to have the most benefit. And so Empower, unlike our previous 2 studies, is actually a 3-armed randomized controlled trial. So the current flow for recruitment and enrollment into the study is participants find out several ways. So we're using social media, patient partner organizations like CDTRP, and then also physicians and other clinicians sharing it with their patients. And they fill out their consent, do their surveys, and then book a little orientation session with us. And in that session, we share just a little bit more about the program and what timelines look like and what they can expect as a potential participant. And then we randomize them to one of 3 groups. And so they could end up in our control group, which just means they'll wait 12 weeks and then do their surveys and get the program. Or they could end up in one of 2 intervention groups. And we're actually doing a rolling recruitment. So we do, you can start the program every Sunday. We are unfortunately in our last week of recruitment. So this is kind of the final time to get enrolled. And both of these get access to the 12-week online program. There's some optional group sessions via Zoom. And then this intervention group 2 just gets an extra level of support with a weekly phone call or weekly check-in, we call them. And again, these are similar to that PVC study where it's done by myself or other graduate students on our team. We call each participant, talk through some of the content for that week, get their feedback, make sure there was no major tech glitches, and also plan and goal set for future weeks in the program. And we do recommend, just based off of our previous study, that people spend about 90 minutes per week on the program. And that's based off that data that showed a greater impact on those fatigue symptoms. It's not enforced. We don't bug people if they don't meet it, but we do just make them aware that that is what it has shown positive impacts before. In terms of our outcomes, so they're very similar to the previous studies we talked about. Our primary outcome is looking at anxiety and depression symptoms. And we're using this well-known survey called the HADS, or the Hospital Anxiety and Depression Scale. And then we have a lot of other secondary and exploratory outcomes. Our secondary outcomes are looking at fatigue again. So it's a big one that's very prevalent across a range of chronic health conditions. We're actually looking at a systematic review, exploring how online programs can impact fatigue symptoms. So that's one of our secondary outcomes. We're also looking at quality of life. So we use a common measure called the SF12, and then another short measure called the EQ5D5L. And then also looking at anxiety and depression as their own symptoms and how this programming can impact those symptoms separately. And then we have a lot of exploratory outcomes. Some of them are demoralization, which is the concept of losing morale after living with a chronic condition, and also sleep disturbance and tech proficiency. We do have a range of individuals in the program as young as 18 to 85. So we've experienced a range of tech proficiencies as well. And it's actually very impressive. And I think one of the great side effects of the program is that tech proficiency. And then also just comparing the arms, recognizing it is 3 arms. So just doing some other comparisons between the arms is also an exploratory outcome. And so where are we? So I did mention this is our last kind of final week of recruitment. So we've actually, up to this point, recruited 785 people and randomized them in the Empower program. Looking at people on the transplant continuum, 233 live with chronic organ failure or are post-transplant, which is about 30% of that total number. And just a breakdown here for interest, 29 people in the study live with chronic kidney disease, 48 live with cirrhosis, 47 live with heart failure, and then 109 are actually post-transplant. The majority are post-liver transplant or post-kidney. And then we've got a subset who are post-lung, heart, or pancreas. And we are predominantly female, so 84% of people in the Empower study are or do identify as female. And in terms of other factors, I think this is really interesting, kind of points at our scalability of this type of programming. But we have people from all over the world. Of course, we are predominantly North American, so Canada and the US. But we do have a couple spots in Asia and in Europe, as well as a couple in Australia who've actually joined the program, which is really exciting. And there's quite a wide spread of where people come from. So the majority say or 43% say they come from urban locations, 34% suburban, and then 22% rural and 10% remote, which is really interesting. So there's potential that those who live rurally or remotely maybe don't have access to this type of programming, and having it being delivered online has made it more accessible to them. And so you've heard a lot from me and Dr. Tandon about how this type of programming can impact people, but we wanted to just share a few words from some of our past participants of the program. So I'll just share this now and hope the sound goes through successfully.
The breath work gives me the proper way to breathe easily in times of when you are, say, stressed, or when you are like resting, if you want to rest like fully, it helps you a lot. And like I said before, like during the time that I can hardly breathe, I think about those things, and it helps me a lot.
Definitely, it improved my mental states, not only for the physical activity or for being to do it together with my wife, but also because like like I said, the breathing and the meditation, I think, did a change in my emotional state.
And the breath work is amazing. Like I had never considered it before. Now I can use deep breathing or belly breaths to put myself to sleep.
And my point of view, those little videos regards of the psychology, they are good because they are short. They have I call them very nutritious, and because they are very brief, but let's say very substantious, they get an impact. You know, that's true. Click.
And I'm pretty sure, like this program will help a lot of. But the core of the program is the breath work and the meditation. That's 100%.
Now, I don't know why necessarily, but it changed my life, and it's got to be because it made me stronger. It made me healthier. It made me happier.
For everybody, because of the way the intensity of the program is, it's for people who have like low mobility to a higher mobility, to the highest mobility.
I can't say enough about it. I so appreciate it because I am like night and day. It's great.
Okay. So that was just a few words from some of our great patient partners talking about their experience with the program. But thank you all so much for being here. I'll just reiterate some of Dr. Tandon's points from her presentation and my presentation. But chronic stress, anxiety, depression, as I'm sure we all know, can significantly impact our physical and our mental health. And there are many different science-based strategies that you can use to empower your journey. She talked about some of them with the disease optimization, symptom management, but some of the ones we've talked about today are those psychological and mind-body interventions, such as Empower, which you can get enrolled in today. I do have a QR code loaded up here, as well as our email. There is our website, www.empower-program.com. I can also type it in the chat where you can learn more and then also start the sign-up process. And we are in our final week of recruitment, so Friday, the recruitment will close and we'll have to gear up for a new study, but you can still get involved. And I will stop my sharing. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Emily. That was really, really interesting. Wow, very impressive. Quite a study and a huge cohort of participants, right?
Yes.
So I'm going to open up the floor to some questions. If anybody has anything they'd like to ask, either raise their hand or post it in the chat. So I'll just there's a few comments in the chat here right now. So Linda Powell's commenting this would be a terrific program for caregivers also. Opportunity for scalability to caregivers who support those waiting or having received a transplant. A research opportunity as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's actually something we've talked about. And I think if we look at our 785 people in the program, I think probably 70% of them would consider themselves caregivers as well. So there's a huge spot and a place for this type of programming. And it's something we've talked to a few different patient partner organizations about creating specific caregiver programs for their group. So it's definitely something we're exploring, Linda, and we'd love to hear from you about potential there.
Excellent. Linda, if you have any further comments, feel free to jump in and happy to.
Well, I just like to say that, the success of a transplant is partly dependent on the support that the patient receives, and both pre-transplant and during and post. And the stress on the caregiver is monumental. So this type of program would be awesome. And the fact that it can be scaled online is tremendous, because there's always been that issue of geography and how to reach out to the caregiver group, and resources are limited. So this is fantastic. I think there's great opportunity here.
Yeah, we did submit a CIHR grant for a caregiver program. So hopefully we hear good news. Yeah.
Great.
Okay, super. Patricia mentioned here, so excellent study design. It's easy to imagine that just having someone check in with you every week would have benefits for wellness. You know, I absolutely, right. I mean, you know, keeping you on the program, keeping you, loyal to it or on track.
Yeah, the check-ins are super valuable for the participants, but also for us. Like a future, I'm going to med school in the fall, so the skills I've learned from checking in with people and hearing their experience have been just very valuable. And it's interesting because for some people, they're kind of an accountability piece. This is what we're hearing from the interviews we're doing. Is there an accountability piece, and it keeps them motivated to stay in the program? And then others who didn't have them talk about, you know, I may get annoyed. I may not want someone checking in with me every week. So it's certainly like a personality or someone who's going to benefit from those type of check-ins. But yeah, definitely a great option.
For sure. Jonathan, you had your hand up?
Yeah, thanks for describing that. It looks like a great program. A couple questions. What was it, I guess, adherence like over the 12-month? Is there challenges with that? Do you have any data on adherence after, right, the 12-month trial? And then the second question, I guess with the overwhelming like female participants, why is that? Is it that they volunteer more or something? Or
Yeah, two great questions. The adhered piece is really interesting, especially online programming. So we are collecting real-time automated tracking data. So we're able to see what people watch, how many minutes they spend on the platform. And there is also a follow-up and an 8-week follow-up to the 12-week program. So we'll be tracking their adherence after that to see kind of maintenance and how often they go back into it. So I don't have any data from our previous studies for that, but it's something we'll explore with this RCT. And then your second question was around the female predominance. It is something we expected. Looking at the literature, it kind of matches what we found in our systematic review, where the majority were females. And we kind of predict that maybe they're more drawn to this type of programming. It's more attracted to them to do these calming meditation and other practices. And we've tried to kind of gear recruitment more towards males with using like athletes and sharing that a lot of athletes do meditation and breathing. So it's something we're trying to bring in more males, but it's worth investigating for sure why this type of programming is more attractive to females.
Yeah, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, one quick comment here from Donna. Caregivers Alberta may be interested in partnering. Is that...
Yeah, they're a group we're quite familiar with and chatted with through putting in that CHR grant. So yeah, they're awesome.
Right. And Erica.
Very interesting presentation. Thank you. Thinking about what the first part of the presentation was and yours, Dr. Tandon's part was very brain related and more MRI related, and your part was actually describing the program. This is a little bit out of scope of what your program is doing, but is there any desire to do structural and functional MRIs futuristically?
Yes, there definitely is. We just met with someone. It's not fMRI, but it's FNIRS, which it's a different type of imaging, but it's very interesting. So it's something we're exploring, is actually looking at brain changes using those markers, and then also other markers, so inflammatory markers as well. So like surveys, some people like they're great. Some clinicians say you need some more objective markers that this type of programming works. So we're definitely looking at using FNIRS and then inflammatory markers and to actually prove the benefit of this programming. Yeah.
Thank you.
So maybe I can ask a question or a comment. So I work with a little bit with the volunteering with lung transplant patients at Toronto General, and they're there doing physiotherapy. Usually coming in 2, 3, 4 times a week, whatever. And the focus is purely on physiotherapy. It's purely on the exercise aspect of it. And I can't help but wonder if, the breath work, all of the other parts of what you've talked about wouldn't be beneficial for them. And is that something that maybe that would be worth pursuing, in the long run, to combine that along with physiotherapy?
Yeah, that's a great point. And it's something we're working with the cardiac rehab group at the U of A. Is an online cardiac rehab program that has the breathing and has the meditation and more psychology content, so that they can access that online in addition to their physio and other things. So I'm sure there's room to expand that to disease groups as well. It's a great point.
Cool, thanks.
Hmm.
All righty. Patricia, comment here. Could you clarify whether you are looking at sex or gender with your recruitment and outcomes?
Yeah, great question, Patricia. We have one student who's really interested in sex and gender and other social positioning factors from this trial. But we do ask about both sex and gender, and we hope to look at outcomes for both sex and gender, as well as other domains of gender. So we work with Dr. Colleen Norris, who's really into women's heart health. But she's developed this survey that looks at domains of gender. So like institutionalized gender. I can't remember all of them at the moment, but we do have a survey that we hope to kind of get a deeper understanding of domains of gender as well as sex. So great question.
Okay, thanks. Donna said here, would be interesting to see what the inflammatory markers do with autoimmune diseases.
Yes, that's one of our first we'll probably start out with for a feasibility trial is those autoimmune groups. Yeah. Cool.
Okay, and Linda has a further comment. This would be a great addition to the COMPASS program offered by Caregivers Alberta.
Ooh, I'm not familiar with the COMPASS program, but I'll definitely spend time looking at it. That sounds great.
Okay. Did you want to mention anything about that, Linda? Is that?
I don't want to speak for Caregivers Alberta, but certainly it's a very positive program to support caregivers, and it's I think it's about 10 hours online. So there's already the online component. So this would tie in really nicely as a physical addition to the program beyond just the interaction online. It would be how to actually help make yourself better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really cool. Hopefully we get that CRTR grant and we can work together to do some great work.
Okay. Any other questions that Emily can help you with? Great presentation. Thank you from Patricia.
Thanks, Patricia.
Oh, we got from Anita. You're muted, I think.
Sorry, very sorry about that. Thanks for the presentation. It was really, really fascinating, really interesting. And I agree, especially with all the comments about how useful it would be for caregivers. And I was just wondering, in your kind of plan for the data that you're gathering, if you're going to be kind of differentiating the results from the pre-transplant patients and the post-transplant patients. And I think I've been doing a little bit of research with patients and caregivers, qualitative research around kidney graft loss. And one thing that has come up sometimes from the caregivers especially is how challenging it is to deal with what's I think understood to be some like mood swing side effects of immunosuppressant medications. And I was just wondering if that's all going to be taken into consideration. Like, is there is it, I don't and I'm not a clinician myself. It's just kind of what I'm hearing from the you know, from some lived experience that it is very it can be very challenging with the mood swings post-transplant. So that's my question.
Yeah, so I'll kind of try to address that. So we have, when we analyze the data, we'll look at each subgroup of the chronic disease group. So as I mentioned, we've got like those 10 chronic disease specific programs. So we've got like cirrhosis, CKD, chronic liver disease, and post-transplant. So we'll look at the impact within those subgroups. So we'll be able to tell if there's potential differences there. And then your second part, can you repeat that part again? Just, around the mood swings. Yeah. So I don't know how we're going to address that. We are doing interviews with people within like 8 weeks follow-up after their program. So hopefully we can kind of delve deeper into the impacts and experiences with the program there. But we do have an exclusion criteria if people are less than 3 months post-transplant. So hopefully try to address maybe some more acute impacts of the transplant. So.
Okay, we have a couple of minutes left. Any last questions or comments that anyone has?
I just have one last comment. Is I think you briefly addressed it, but the long-term retention of the skills gained, like it'd be interesting to see a year later what the status was, either qualitatively, quantitatively, or both.
Yeah, that's a good point. We don't have plans to do it qualitatively. We did collect PHNs for people within Alberta, so potentially looking at healthcare utilization long-term for people enrolled in the trial. But beyond that, we haven't considered anything there.
Yeah. Great presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Linda.
Okay, we're right on at almost 3:59, I think it is. Any last comments before we wrap it up for today? Okay, then we will leave it at that. So thank you all for all of the questions and comments throughout today's presentations. And Mrs. Johnson, on behalf of the CDTRP, thank you again for presenting. If anyone has any additional questions or comments or suggested topics and speakers, please contact Erica Croft at ekcroft@cdtrp.ca. And I want to mention that all participants will receive an email asking them to fill out a survey. And we'd really appreciate it if you could take 3 minutes to complete that. It really helps us a lot. So thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.